Radiation doesn't announce itself, it simply starts the countdown on your life without telling you when it began. That is the hook most survivors miss. They think danger is something you see, hear, or feel. But in a nuclear post-collapse world, the deadliest threat is the one that never reveals its presence until your biology is already compromised. And that is why most people won't make it. Once the world fell, every assumption about safety dissolved. The air turned into a negotiator of decay. The soil became a carrier of particulate death. Every abandoned structure, every tool you scavenge, every shortcut you take hides an invisible cost measured in microsieverts you cannot sense without the right instruments. Survival is no longer a test of strength. It is a test of calculation. Radiation is not chaos. It is a ruthless mathematician that tracks exposure with perfect memory and zero mercy. Your old instincts are liabilities. Bravery is irrelevant. Optimism is fatal. Only precision matters now. Precision in measurement, shielding, movement, timing, and discipline. In this world, you don't fear radiation. You respect its rules and outthink its angles. The 7 tools in this doctrine are not conveniences. They are the thin line between remaining biologically operational and crossing into irreversible cellular failure. This opening is not designed to frighten you. It is designed to strip away illusions, because once you understand that survival here is a cold equation, you can finally begin to solve it. The first tool is the dosimeter, and it is not optional. In a nuclear post-collapse world, the greatest killer is not the highest dose. It is the unmeasured one. Radiation does not burn your skin or ring alarms inside your nerves. It accumulates in silence, converting minutes of exposure into long-term biological debt. A dosimeter is the only instrument that translates that invisible assault into numbers you can act on. Without it, you are functionally blind, walking through contaminated zones with the confidence of someone who has already made their final mistake. A survivor who moves without a dosimeter behaves like someone wandering through a minefield while insisting they can sense danger. But radiation has no scent, no warmth, no immediate consequence. Your body gives you no feedback until the damage is irreversible. That is why dose ignorance is lethal. You do not collapse at the moment you fail. You collapse days later, when the threshold you exceeded finally demands payment. And by then, the mission, the shelter, the caches, and the people depending on you have already lost their operator. The dosimeter rewrites how you think. It transforms movement into calculation. Time in the open becomes a tactical resource. Every entry into a building becomes a risk assessment. Every scavenging mission becomes a timed operation. With a dosimeter, you stop guessing and start operating. You learn which routes bleed your lifespan and which preserve it. You learn when to push, when to retreat, and when a cache is not worth the dose it demands. This tool does not protect you by blocking radiation. It protects you by preventing you from acting like someone who believes protection is unnecessary. It disciplines your decisions, and disciplined decisions are the only currency that buys longevity in contaminated territory. Without this instrument, every step is a gamble. With it, every step is a controlled calculation. And in a world where radiation has perfect memory, the survivor who measures always outlives the one who assumes. The second line of defense is full-seal respiratory protection, because radiation is not only an external threat, it is a particulate predator waiting for you to inhale it. Most survivors misunderstand this. They imagine radiation as beams or waves drifting through empty air. But the real danger after nuclear collapse is the radioactive dust, microscopic particles of cesium, iodine, strontium, and pulverized fallout that behave like ordinary dirt until they lodge inside your lungs and begin destroying you from the inside out. External exposure can be managed. Internal contamination cannot be undone. A proper respirator is not about comfort or symbolism. It is about airtight discipline. The seal is everything. A mask that leaks 1% of unfiltered air might as well be no mask at all. Every breath you take in a contaminated zone becomes a potential lifetime dose, not measured in microsieverts, but in the long decay curve of radionuclides now trapped inside your tissue. Filtering the outside world is not a luxury. It is the only way to keep the radioactive environment from becoming part of your biology. In the post-collapse landscape, wind is no longer just weather. It is a distribution system for particulate death. Every gust that sweeps through a broken street lifts contaminated dust from the ground and suspends it in the air. Every step you take, every door you open, every object you disturb creates invisible clouds of inhalable fallout. Without full seal respiratory protection, you will breathe in the collapse with every inhale. A proper mask changes how you operate. You move slower, but with intention. You conserve air and minimize speech to reduce moisture buildup. You avoid unnecessary exertion because heavy breathing pulls harder on the seal. You check the mask before every mission because one tiny crack transforms survival into self-delusion. Filters become strategic assets, replaceable, exhaustible, and as important as food. The mask does not create safety. It creates a barrier that buys you operational time in toxic airspace. Fail the seal, and the environment enters your lungs. Protect the seal, and you deny the invisible enemy its easiest point of entry. In this world, you are only as safe as your next breath. And your next breath is only safe if you have earned it through airtight discipline. Protective suits are misunderstood by almost everyone who has never operated inside a contaminated zone. They imagine thick, armored layers that block radiation like a shield. That fantasy dies the moment you step into real fallout. No suit on Earth stops gamma radiation. What the suit actually does is something far more important. It prevents radioactive particles from claiming your skin, your clothes, your hair, your gear, and eventually your bloodstream. The suit is not a wall against radiation. It is a wall against contamination. And in a nuclear post-collapse world, contamination is the silent enemy that rides home with you. A multi-layered protective system is built around one principle: sacrifice. The outer layer is meant to die so that you don't. It takes the dust, the mud, the wind-driven fallout, and absorbs the impact. When you leave the hot zone, that layer is stripped, washed, burned, or sealed away. Beneath it is the containment layer, designed to keep particulates from slipping through seams, folds, or saturated fabric. If the outer layer fails, the inner one buys you time. If the inner one fails, you join the list of survivors who carried the collapse back into their shelter without realizing it. This suit changes the way you move. Mobility becomes a tactical calculation, not a natural act. Every bend, kneel, crawl, or reach risks creating friction points where particles can accumulate. Sweat becomes a liability. Moisture means adhesion. Heat becomes the enemy of endurance. The suit traps warmth and overheating forces mistakes. But you endure it because the alternative is allowing dust to settle on your skin and remain there long after you believe you escaped the zone. Improvised suits follow the same logic, even if the materials differ. Rain gear, tarps, heavy-duty plastic, waxed fabrics, layered synthetics, they are all attempts to create sacrificial surfaces. The principle remains identical. keep the world off you long enough to complete the mission and return clean. Without this barrier, every scavenging run becomes a contamination event, and every contamination event becomes a countdown to internal exposure. The suit is not comfort. It is a prison you willingly enter because the outside environment is no longer neutral. It demands patience, heat tolerance, and absolute discipline during decontamination. Its purpose is simple. Ensure that when you leave the zone does not leave with you. This layer is the difference between being exposed and being infiltrated. And in this world, infiltration is death wearing the mask of survival. Potassium iodide is one of the most misunderstood tools in the entire radiation survival arsenal. Most people believe it is a universal antidote, a pill that makes radiation harmless. That belief is not only wrong, it is catastrophic. Ki does not block radiation. It does not protect your organs. It does not neutralize fallout. Its purpose is brutally narrow. It saturates the thyroid so that radioactive iodine cannot take root inside it. That is the full extent of its power. Anything more you assume from it becomes a confident mistake that the post-collapse world will punish. Radioactive iodine is a predator with a preference. It targets the thyroid with surgical precision, embedding itself into the gland and irradiating it from the inside. Once it is absorbed, the damage is unavoidable. Ki works by filling the thyroid before the radioactive iodine can. Timing is everything. Taken too early, it fades before the threat arrives. Taken too late, it is meaningless. The window of effectiveness is small, and in a chaotic aftermath, most survivors miss it because they treat Ki like a miracle instead of a tactical tool. This is why Ki is not a shield. It is a race. You are racing the uptake rate of your own endocrine system, trying to occupy the receptors before the fallout does. You take it when radioactive iodine is present or imminent, not as a daily ritual. You take the correct dose, not double or triple, because overdose creates its own biological failures. And you never assume that Ki frees you from the need for a mask, a suit, or distance. It covers exactly one vulnerability in a body filled with others. Beyond Ki, internal shielding agents like certain binding compounds and stable iodine sources play supporting roles. They reduce absorption, accelerate excretion, or limit biological integration. But none of them rewrite the rules. They are tactical aids, not salvation. They give you marginal gains in a domain where margins matter. But they cannot compensate for poor discipline, reckless movement, or exposure born from ignorance. The smart survivor treats Ki as part of a system, not a cure. Its value is real, but only when integrated with dosimetry, respiratory protection, and contamination control. It is a tool that prevents a specific form of internal sabotage. Nothing more, nothing less. In the nuclear aftermath, people will die believing Ki made them untouchable. You will live because you understand it only buys you time, not immunity. Detection is survival. The Geiger counter, your survey meter, is not a gadget. It is the only voice the radioactive world still uses to communicate with you. Without it, every environment looks identical. Quiet streets, abandoned homes, empty fields, all appearing harmless while their contamination levels vary by orders of magnitude. Your eyes cannot tell the difference between a survivable zone and a death trap. The instrument can. And if you do not carry it, you are not navigating. You are drifting blind into terrain shaped by invisible gradients of decay. A Geiger counter converts the silence of radiation into actionable intelligence. It reveals hotspots hiding behind walls, contamination pools accumulating in gutters, and deadly pockets of dust waiting on windowsills and stairwells. The device teaches you the truth. The collapse refuses to state out loud. Danger is rarely evenly distributed. You can walk 2 meters to the left and cut your exposure by half. You can step into a basement and double it. Only the meter knows, and only the disciplined survivor listens. This tool changes your pace. You stop moving like a scavenger and start moving like a technician. Every doorway becomes a checkpoint. Every object becomes a question. How hot is it? Every abandoned shelter becomes a negotiation. You do not trust your instincts, you trust the numbers. And those numbers dictate whether you push deeper or withdraw before the dose curve becomes unacceptable. Radiation does not reward courage, only precision. The meter gives you the precision. But owning a Geiger counter means nothing if you do not understand its language. The clicks are not decorations, they are warnings. The rising rate is not excitement, it is a countdown. You learn to compare background levels to spikes. You learn to read gradients like topography, treating radiation as terrain rather than atmosphere. You map safe paths, not by memory, but by measurement. And when you return to the same area weeks later, you measure again, because decay changes the battlefield and assumptions kill. Most survivors fail because they assume the environment stays constant. It never does. Weather shifts contamination. Wind relocates danger. Water spreads particulates into new zones. The meter reveals these movements. It exposes the lies the land tells you. And it ensures you never step into a room thinking it is harmless simply because it was harmless yesterday. With a survey meter in hand, you become a strategist instead of a wanderer. Without it, you are a statistic waiting to be written. Improvised shielding is where theory ends and survival begins. When the grid collapses and manufactured gear becomes scarce, you aren't protected by ideal materials. You're protected by density, mass, and your ability to understand how radiation bends around them. In a nuclear aftermath, the environment becomes both your threat and your toolbox. Earth, water, concrete, metal, scrap, none of it is decoration. All of it is potential armor. But armor only works when you understand the physics behind it. Radiation does not care about intentions, it cares about attenuation. The rule is simple. The denser the material, the better it slows the assault. Lead is superior, but rare. Concrete is dependable, but immobile. Water is heavy, but abundant. Earth is crude, but everywhere. These aren't just materials, they are survival equations. You aren't building fortifications for comfort. You are buying fractions of safety, slicing the dose curve gradually downward. With every centimeter of mass you place between your biology and the outside world. Improvised shielding forces you to think in layers. A single board won't save you, but multiple layers of scavenged metal, soil-filled containers, water barrels, broken masonry, or packed sandbags create a cumulative barrier. You stop fantasizing about perfect protection and start constructing strategic density. Every object becomes a calculation. How thick? How heavy? How many half-value layers can I stack before mobility dies or structural collapse becomes the next threat? Improvised shielding is less about building walls and more about building time. Time to wait out fallout, time to reduce exposure, time to plan the next movement without bleeding life into the environment. You also learn that angle matters. Radiation does not arrive politely in straight lines. It scatters, reflects, and travels through unexpected vectors. A doorway, a window, a collapsed roof beam. These become radiation pathways that must be sealed, redirected, or buried under weight. Even the ground you stand on becomes a hazard when fallout settles. forcing you to think downward as much as outward. A clever survivor doesn't shield a room. They shield the angles of attack. In the post-collapse world, improvised shielding is not a craft. It is a battle against invisibility. You take whatever the world gives you and convert it into mass. You create narrow corridors of safety inside vast landscapes of contamination. You survive not by finding perfect protection, but by assembling enough imperfect pieces to blunt the enemy's reach. In the end, shielding is not brilliance. Shielding is density, discipline, and the willingness to move tons of earth for a few hours of safety. That is the cost of living in a world where the air itself has become an adversary. The collapse did more than scatter radiation across the landscape. It silenced the machines built to detect it. EMP events, grid failures, and the death of infrastructure wiped out the electronics that once served as humanity's early warning system. In this new world, technology isn't convenience. It is the last thread connecting you to situational awareness. And once that thread snaps, you are reduced to guesswork in an environment where guesswork is fatal. That is why Faraday storage becomes a survival tool, not an engineering novelty. You are not protecting gadgets. You are preserving your ability to perceive the battlefield. A Faraday enclosure is brutally simple in function. It denies electromagnetic energy a pathway into your devices. In the post-collapse landscape, this simplicity is power. Your dosimeters, survey meters, communication radios, digital maps, and improvised detection tools are all vulnerable to EMP damage. Once any of these fail, you lose more than the tool. You lose the precision it provides. You lose the ability to measure danger, to update routes, to coordinate movement, to verify contamination, to forecast decay cycles. You lose the one advantage biology can never give you. Proper Faraday practice requires discipline. You isolate critical devices inside conductive containers, metal ammo cans, steel boxes, layered foil-lined cases, ensuring full enclosure, no gaps, no assumptions. Insulation inside the container is mandatory. Conductivity must not touch the device itself. Every opening becomes a vulnerability, every seam a potential fault. You cannot treat this as storage. You treat it as armor. And like all armor in the post-collapse world, it is only as strong as the discipline applied to it. Faraday protection does not restore the old world, but it preserves the scraps of it that still matter. A functioning Geiger counter becomes a map. A working radio becomes a lifeline. A protected battery bank becomes the difference between navigating by data and stumbling through contaminated zones on hope. You are not shielding electronics from an event that already happened. You are shielding them from the next one. Because in a world ruled by chaos, EMP is not a one-time threat. Infrastructure remains fragile. Reactors remain unstable, and hostile fronts may still weaponize the electromagnetic spectrum. Your technology is fragile, the environment is not. The Faraday barrier is the thin membrane that prevents the collapse from stripping away the last tools that let you stay ahead of radiation instead of at its mercy. In the end, the enclosure is not about saving devices, it is about saving the intelligence those devices generate. Lose that intelligence, and you revert to instinct. And instinct is exactly what radiation is designed to punish. Radiation survival is not a collection of tools, it is a doctrine. Each instrument, each barrier, each chemical agent, each protective layer operates as a component in a single integrated system. Alone, they offer fragments of safety. Together, they form a protocol that allows you to move inside a world designed to erase you. The collapse did not merely scatter radioactive zones across the land, it reshaped the way every decision must be made. This part is where the 7 tools stop being equipment and become a unified operational strategy. The center of this doctrine is exposure budgeting. You no longer measure a mission by distance or difficulty. You measure it by the dose it demands. Every second inside the open environment is a transaction. The dosimeter tracks the cost. The survey meter identifies the price spikes. The protective suit reduces contamination premiums. The respirator prevents internal debt. KI covers one narrow but dangerous loophole in the biological ledger. Improvised shielding lowers the surrounding cost when you hold position. Faraday protected electronics preserve the instruments that allow you to keep the math accurate. The doctrine is not poetic. It is arithmetic. Movement becomes compression of time. You learn to shorten routes, minimize wandering, eliminate hesitation. You strip away inefficiencies that once felt human. You move like an operator, not a drifter. Each step must be justified. Each detour must be paid for. The world no longer rewards curiosity. It rewards precision. Your mission phases tighten. Your extraction points become non-negotiable. If the meter spikes, you do not debate. You withdraw. Survival is not stubbornness. It is obedience to numbers. Decontamination becomes ritual. You do not bring the outside world into your safe zones. The suit becomes a barrier, but your discipline turns it into a protocol. You strip layers in sequence. You wash tools, rinse masks, segregate gear, and never ever cross-contaminate the sanctuary where you sleep. One mistake becomes a vector. One careless moment becomes a delayed strike against your own biology. You treat contamination like an infection that waits for emotional weakness to invade. Shelter transition becomes strategy. You do not settle by comfort or nostalgia. You settle by decay rates, wind patterns, soil absorption, and shielding opportunity. Earth berms, underground spaces, thick-walled structures, and natural density zones become your allies. You choose homes the way soldiers choose bunkers, not the way civilians choose views. Every shelter is a temporary fortress against a slow-moving storm. Retreat becomes wisdom. There is no shame in abandoning a mission that costs too much radiation. Survivors who cling to stubborn objectives die with contaminated lungs and corrupted marrow. You operate under a single truth. You can always attempt another mission, but you cannot negotiate with accumulated dose. The collapse does not care about bravery. It cares about math. This integrated protocol is not romantic. It is not cinematic heroism. It is calculation fused with discipline. You are not trying to thrive. You are trying to maintain function long enough to adapt, rebuild, reposition, and outlast the decay cycle of a poisoned world. The tools protect you only when you wield them as parts of a unified strategy, not as isolated objects. The survivors who understand this become operators of their own longevity. Those who don't become a statistic waiting for discovery. Radiation does not kill randomly. It kills predictably. Your job is to become even more predictable than the threat, to calculate faster, shield smarter, move cleaner, and retreat sooner. That is the doctrine. The world that existed before the collapse taught people to trust comfort, routine, and the illusion that danger would always reveal itself in visible forms. But radiation rewrote that relationship. It turned the environment into a silent adversary and converted every careless assumption into a delayed strike against the body. In this final moment of the doctrine, you must understand a simple truth. Survival in a nuclear aftermath is not about strength, nor luck, nor improvisational genius. It is about respecting an invisible enemy that never sleeps, never negotiates, and never forgets. You have learned that tools are not magic. Dosimeters do not save you. They measure how fast you are dying. Respirators do not grant immunity. They buy uncontaminated breaths. Protective suits do not make you invincible. They prevent the outside world from taking root on your skin. Ki does not cleanse your blood. It wins a narrow race against a single isotope. Geiger counters do not keep you safe. They expose the lies the terrain tells you. Improvised shielding does not eliminate danger. It bends the decay curve just enough for you to endure. Faraday enclosures do not restore civilization. They protect the last machines capable of giving you intelligence in a blind landscape. What saves you is not the equipment. It is the discipline behind it. The collapse punished humanity for believing survival was instinctual. Instinct is noise, radiation is math, and the only way to outlive math is to become an operator of your own existence, calculating exposure, enforcing protocols, refining movement, mastering decontamination, and abandoning missions when the numbers turn against you. If you follow this doctrine, you do more than survive. You endure long enough to rebuild, to reclaim pockets of safety, to carve out zones where the next generation can stand without inheriting your mistakes. The world may never return to what it was, but survival has never been about restoration. It has always been about adaptation. You began this journey with an invisible enemy. You end it with the one advantage that enemy cannot counter: informed, disciplined, relentless strategy. In the wasteland carved by nuclear collapse, that strategy is the only weapon that still works.